Viewers, welcome to Crux of the Matter. As you know, in this electoral season, the Prime Minister-led NDA has been claiming it has bettered the previous Congress-led UPA's performance when it comes to developing India. The NDA even tabled a white paper recently to demonstrate how it has turned around what it calls was a fragile economy. A number of reports have been tabled to gauge some key macro indicators, but as you know, these are mostly surveys, and therefore their methodology and other parameters, including conclusions, have been called into question. Now, for the first time, data, real data, has been collated by the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Panel that physically maps every square foot of India's territory in a bid to determine the distribution of growth rate of total built-up surfaces across all parliamentary constituencies and districts. The mapping was carried out by the European Commission using high-resolution daytime satellite imagery to gather built-up surface volume and height information. The data presents an accurate picture of the NDA's economic performance in comparison to the UPA's economic performance across all parliamentary constituencies and all districts. At least that's what the PMAC has told CNN News 18. Now remember, viewers, the data that CNN News 18 has accessed has not been viewed on television channels before. This data has been provided viewers to us to go over, and we have interviewed Shamika Ravi, who's a member of the Prime Minister Economic Advisory Panel, who prepared the report. Wonderful to be here with you, Shamika Ravi. We're going to be studying the economic performance of parliamentary constituencies. We're also going to look at district-wise data. And remember, viewers, it is so important to gauge performance through data and not really through rhetoric. So here we are. This particular study will contrast the performance of the UPA with the Modi years, 10 years, significant amount of time to basically make assessments.
Yeah. Actually, the data that we analyze is over 15 years. And the reason is because in democracies, I think it's important for people to know objectively what the differences in performance have been. And while we do it all the time, you know, from the economic side, we tend to gauge by using a few macro indicators like GDP per capita growth, for instance, or inflation, etc. Now, the GDP numbers are also, they are estimated, they're calculated based on surveys. And surveys have their own measurement errors, etc. This is far more objective because for the first time, we have tried to gauge economic performance over time for different political regimes using satellite data. The second is, of course, not just the data quality, the second is also highly localized data. It's not all India performance that we are interested in. I think that is important. But I think in large federal democracies like ours, it's important to know performance at highly localized level. And that is what this data.
So the resolution of the satellite imagery must be quite great.
Yeah.
And was it done in the evening or in the day?
So let us look at the nature of the data.
Yeah.
This is called the Global Human Settlement Layer data. It has been put together by the European Commission. They have spent tons of money and this is exceptionally high quality data, because for a long time while we relied on night lights data, the NASA, etc., increasingly as economies are moving towards LED, luminosity is a problem, right? The second is also that high luminosity places like Delhi, for instance, tends to shadow literally places like Meerut, Jaipur, which are in the vicinity, but the luminosity doesn't pick up this kind of stuff. So even within satellite, now we are moving to the daytime satellite imagery. And since the resolution is very high, in certain cases it's also 10 into 10 meters, it's really very, very high resolution. Now what we look at is the built up surface area. So they look at various metrics, and one we use for our analysis is the built up surface, which basically through the satellite images it picks up everything that is constructed or built up, which includes all forms of infrastructure, of course, but residential, non-residential areas, height of buildings. So it's highly detailed, and I think it becomes an important proxy for economic activity.
That's fundamentally important to note. This is not some statistical exercise sitting in the Niti Aayog. This is actually looking at visual evidence of the kind never been recorded. Let's now go through the various plates.
Now, just to give an example, this is what one picture looks like, and this is the city of Kolkata, and of course, you can zoom in and look at the details, but this is the kind of images that they use for calculating constructed areas. So that's how the data is.
So what are these red dots then?
It's high density areas. High density areas showing high density of built up surface.
Okay.
So not only do they look at, that's why it's called human settlements, that it's not just humans but also the settlements, and therefore it's a mark of development. Now Rahul, I think it's again important that not only is the data objective because it is satellite, but also because it's a large country and we want to look at performance, and that's why we call it politics in action, because first we do the analysis at the parliamentary constituency level. So I think one of the novelty of this exercise is also combining satellite data with election commission data, and therefore localized we are able to say which parliamentary constituency has fared in what form over the last 10
and
years.
you can actually see all the dots. These are all dots, and these are individual parliamentary constituencies.
Correct.
And here you have the annualized growth rate,
Correct.
which shows how much growth has taken place over a period of 15 years.
Yes.
So some of them are bunched between 0 and 2.5, and then 2.5 and 5, and 5 and 7, and 7 to about 10.
Absolutely. That's absolutely well
this
explained.
This is UPA and this is NDA. This is 10. This is 2015 to 2020, and this is 2010 to 2015.
Correct.
Very interesting. Okay, so there's a cutoff there at 2020.
Yes, clearly you can see the both the distributions.
Right.
The averages are higher here, because the average under the UPA 2 regime was 2.8%.
So are you saying that more parliamentary constituencies are growing at higher rate?
Yes.
That's why the box is bigger.
Exactly.
And this is a smaller box.
Smaller box. And also the average across all is 2.8 there, and here it is 3.3, which means on an average, constituencies are growing at 18% more under the 2015 to 2020 epoch.
And a lot more are growing.
A lot more. You can see the
more.
distribution,
Yes.
that you have all the way to 10%.
Yes.
So we've had, quite remarkably, we've had constituencies in this country which have grown at more than 10. Now, clearly
Yes,
you
you can
see
look
there
at
is
that.
yes.
The line up beyond or up to 10%, there are more dots. Here really is where the UPA begins to flag, isn't it? About 7.5, and there you have about 5.
There is none above 7.
There is none above
None.
7, and there are about just 5 or 6 here,
Yeah.
above 7.5.
Right.
But there's almost a dozen or more.
Yes.
That's,
yes.
that's
So the whole distribution in some sense has shifted.
Okay. Can we get more granular in this?
Yes. Now, those dots which you saw in terms of the statistical analysis, now we want to project it onto the real parliamentary constituency. These are the shape files. And you can see that that is the kind of
UPA.
growth we had under UPA 2, and this is the kind of growth we have had under NDA.
So the
under
red
Modi.
ones are above 5%.
The
growth.
red ones are the fastest growing, you're right.
So
It's
you're
above
beginning
5%.
to see a lot happening in the Hindi belt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
But-
so it's no coincidence that the Modi government gets this big mandate from the Hindi belt.
Yes.
But you're also beginning to see a lot happening in the south.
Yes.
And these are parliamentary constituencies.
Absolutely. You see the red has now gotten dispersed across the country.
Yeah.
And there are many more red areas, which means highest growth.
Yeah.
And you see that on the whole, the reds seem to, if you just look at the map broadly, they are mostly happening in what have traditionally been the underdeveloped parts of the country.
Yes.
Like the northeast, or you look at parts of western UP, you look at Jharkhand, right? You look at Rajasthan, you look at parts of the tribal belts of Maharashtra, etc. You see parts of Andhra and Tamil Nadu as well. But these are all districts which have traditionally been underdeveloped.
So we're also looking at dramatic transformations. A lot of people will say that, look, the base effect kicks in, low base, so obviously, anything that's above 1%
Right.
is a miracle,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. How do you address those people?
Look, India's growth, if you look at per capita GDP, one argument is that we continue to grow so high fast is also because we are still under $3,000 per capita per year. So we have a long way to grow, and hence you will continue to see base effect. The point is, almost all the constituencies have a certain inherent base effect. The fact that now you are seeing this spread across is giving you a sense of where is this overall growth in the country coming from. right? So you're right, there is base effect, but the fact that it is now getting spread across the country means on an aggregate it is reflecting in overall growth of the country as well.
So remember, viewers, apart from the south where the BJP doesn't have much of a presence at the parliamentary level, a large number of these red, you can see this is UPA, look at Gujarat, look at parts of Rajasthan where the NDA has been in power, in maximal terms. You can see the transformation. All those which were under 3% or about 3% are now zooming upwards of 5%. And you were saying, Shamika Ravi, a lot of those 10%ers are in Uttar Pradesh.
They are. They are in absolutely the remotest parts. When we combine those two graphs, we get this, which means which are the places, the base effect that you're talking about, where you have had the biggest jump from UPA 2 to NDA under Modi. And again, greater than 2% difference is the highest that you notice. And you see those are the dark greens. And again, you see exactly
so where, and it's not a coincidence that these are the seats, this is the Hindi belt where you've seen actually a lot more growth as a gap over the last 10 years.
Correct.
So that
and the
shows
Northeast
you that BJP parliamentarians, I don't want to make this about political parties, but BJP parliamentarians are performing better than perhaps parliamentarians from other states, except for in Tamil Nadu and one pocket of Kerala.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
What? That's Palakkad?
That's probably Palakkad, yes.
That's Palakkad, and that's some parts of, not really the coastal parts of Tamil Nadu.
So that's why it's the most underdeveloped parts.
Yeah.
The developed parts are usually the coastal parts of Tamil Nadu and of course western Tamil Nadu. But the biggest growth you are seeing are in pockets in between. Now you see the Nilgiris, which are traditionally the poorest.
Yes, there are large areas here. Now why aren't we seeing growth in this pocket? Even in the last map, let's just go back once to the last here. These are the areas which have remained pretty much untouched, unfortunately. Growth hasn't. So what do you think is the reason here? This is Bengal, Eastern Bihar, pockets
now, the thing is, Rahul, this study really doesn't give you reasons and what are the sectors, and this is really an objective measurement of what the final outcome in terms of growth have been.
So this is not hiding anything. I mean, if this was supposed to be a show that was only sort of edifying the government, we wouldn't really be talking about Bihar, because that's where also the NDA has had a huge number of MPs coming in from, and we know the numbers. So none of this data is actually shying away from showing the areas which have remained, flaccid when it comes to demonstrating growth. So there's objectivity here.
Oh, completely. In fact, now to your point, Rahul, what you said, you do not want to make it a political statement, but this is a political story, which is why we call it politics in action. This is now analysis for 2009 to 14.
Okay, lots 15. Of graphs. What are these?
Lots of graphs. So this is telling you from 10 to 15, which is when UPA 2 was the regime. Yeah. If you look at the performance of parliamentary constituencies under different parties, that's the BJP.
That's 2.7%.
2.7. This is the Congress, 2.9. And these are others, 2.8. Statistically, there's no difference between them, right? Statistically, they all seem to be performing very similarly. This is in the UPA 2 regime. This is NDA under Modi. While you see Indian National Congress remains at 2.8% average, others 2.6, look what has happened to the BJP constituencies. So what you said, you're right. It is the BJP parliamentary constituencies which are getting on an average 3.9% growth, which by the way is 21% higher than Congress and 31% higher than others. So it is very much a political story.
And do these parliamentary constituencies also sort of overlay state governments where the BJP is in power? Is that so the double engine contiguity? Because the one gripe is, and the state governments say that we don't get central funds. Right. So what do you expect? But these are parliamentary constituencies that have a double engine effect here, or what is?
Now, we have not laid out the state effect here.
Okay.
But what we will talk about is at the district level, and then if you look at the data, then we can assess whether these are states which are politically aligned with the center or these are opposition states. So it's very much a possibility to do something like that.
But it is interesting, if you just go back to the previous slide here, you said that when the UPA was in power, BJP constituencies Congress and others were pretty much performing at the same level.
Exactly.
If anything, Congress was doing slightly better.
Well, the thing is, statistically, it is not significant.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's not just it's also the distribution.
Yes.
So statistically, if you see, there is no difference between the three different segments.
Absolutely. I mean,
that's
it's just, it's minimal. And then when Modi comes in, you can see this is the difference, 3.9% touching 4%, and there are a lot more which are going in this 5%, and there's hardly any here. So it does tell you that perhaps either it's the double engine effect, or it is just a more performance oriented sort of, let's get results oriented sort of approach to governance.
Right, it's a motivation. I think it's overall energy. But what you mentioned in terms of, I think we should look at that as well.
What how many of annualized growth rate? What does that mean?
Oh, annualized is because the GHSL data really gives you pictures every 5 years, which is an epoch in the data. What you can do here is annualize it for every year.
I see.
You can calculate what is. Now, the nature of the satellite imagery data is such that this can be very high frequency as well. So the raw data in the form it exists, and I think this is the potential of data like this, that imagine in the future, while we are relying on the European Commission right now, I think over time we are hoping we'll begin to get this daily image, at least weekly, from ISRO. And imagine what kind of scrutiny, what kind of monitoring one can do at an administrative local level of what is happening to projects, near completion, etc. So I think the power of this kind of data, that's another reason why we wanted to introduce these new forms of data to analysts and people who are doing this kind of policy research. So this is excellent data. What about inequality? And I think beyond averages, I mean, this is a large country and it's not going to be average the same everywhere. We want to know what is happening. Is development happening mostly in urban places? Is this a Sudbut ki sarkar, as there is one criticism? Are we really growing only for the rich and so on? And I think this analysis, this result really completely negates those kind of hypotheses. If you look, we have on the x-axis here the constituencies which are listed by the amount of construction that already exists. So the lowest construction, the constituencies which have less than 0.6, for instance, 0.16, which is 16% of that constituency actually has some form of construction. So these are highly underdeveloped parts. These are remote areas. These are tribal belts. These are rural areas, what we traditionally call extremely less built up or surface. The highest category is around 35%.
35%.
These are our cities, right? Mega cities where a large part of the constituency has some form of built up, etc. Now, if you look at where has this growth happened, you see that the highest growth under the orange line,
average
which is
predicted growth rates, 6% and above,
for
are in the least developed.
Yes, that is for
that's the
NDA
under Modi.
And you've had the least in terms of the
yes, so this is not a Sudbut sarkar.
It's not. So this dispels that, and it also tells you we are moving towards convergence, right? You're getting rid of inequality that existed, which is why the most underdeveloped parts is where the development seems to be focused.
Which is also what was broadly being sort of brought out through the GOI's consumption expenditure survey, which seemed to suggest a narrowing the gap between India and Bharat, so to speak.
Yes, you're right.
So, and you're now beginning to see it in actual terms, physical infrastructure is also coming.
So it's completely consistent with the monthly per capita consumption expenditure data that came out, which showed that the biggest growth have been in rural segments and in the poorer parts of the country. So here also you're seeing the same. Now, the thing to remark, note here is UPA 2 also had relatively more growth in underdeveloped parts. But if you compare the two regimes, then you are seeing that under NDA, the less developed parts have received significantly more.
Yeah, the median is more than 2%.
Yes, while here they overlap.
Yes, they overlap.
Which means the difference here is not that much, but the biggest gains have been in the most remote and rural parts of the country.
And that's perhaps also why, there's this whole argument about masses and classes, who's voting for whom. You have perhaps the masses voting for the NDA because there's more reaching them. So fundamentally, even the data is now beginning to back up some of the assertions that have been made by the NDA in government or in parliament when they brought out their record, or they've compared their government with the white paper and they brought out the white paper comparing their performance with the UPA. So all of this is satellite imagery that is now beginning to bring visually to us the changes that have happened.
Also remember aspirational districts. Now, of course, we are moving to aspirational blocks, but the idea is we try to identify the least developed or the most backward parts to focus development on. And so in some sense, this is a measure of success of some of those policies. Now, let's move on beyond parliamentary constituencies. Remember, India has 543 Lok Sabha constituencies, but we have around 800 districts, which is the administrative unit. So, to the question when you ask about states and administration, I think it's important to look at some of this from the administrative point of view, which means at the district level, how do the results look? And again, what we see is under the NDA regime, an average district, if you look at the distribution of growth, then on an average, districts have grown at around 3.5%, right? If you compare that with UPA 2, it was 2.9%, and this difference is 21%. There's a 21% difference between them. If you compare it with the UPA 1, which is from 2005 to 10 epoch, that difference is almost 31%.
And the interesting thing is again the density of all the districts, and you're beginning to see many more districts with 5% plus growth. I mean, just look at that populated axis there of which is obviously your y-axis, and that is beginning to show up a lot more dots, more and more districts, and there's hardly any crowding here. It's almost pretty much denuded there.
So these two look similar, and because it's at 2.9 and 2.6 and they are not statistically different from each other, well, 3.5 is significantly higher. So again, we are saying even if we look at this at a district level, at an administrative unit level, districts under NDA are performing significantly much.
And this cuts across, of course, states and party lines. So
absolutely.
Obviously there is greater emphasis on results once again. There is someone who's going down to the district level, seeking outcome data, and then obviously following up.
Exactly. And so now at the district level, if we go beyond, remember again, an average district in India is 2 million people.
That's true.
And people, I mean, folks outside get boggled at the just sheer size, magnitude of the problem. But we therefore have to go much more granular. And granular here means sub-district level. Now, sub-districts, the distributions look like this. If you now compare, of course, it's completely consistent with the other results, that again, under the NDA regime, you have 3.4% growth at a sub-district level, and it's 2.9 for the UPA 2 and 2.7 under UPA 1. Now, this is again the inequality result at the district level looks exactly the same. Right? I mean, here, of course, on an average, you're going up to almost 8%. That's the kind of growth the underdeveloped districts have had.
Band, really. And so it's sort of 6.3, 6.4 up to 8%, and the other two, UPA 1 and UPA 2, sort of are lagging behind. In fact, UPA 1, if anything, is the maximum growth in the cities or the well-off parts have been under the UPA 1 side. I mean, to just be facetious, that was the more suit-boot sarkar.
It was. It was. Okay. So it did least for inequality.
Right.
That's what we are saying. It's almost like a flat line.
It's almost a flat line.
There's no, so the convergence has really, begun and sort of heightened under the NDA time.
So again, there is data corroborating the, if you want to call it rhetoric, you can, but the claims that are made by the NDA that look, they're actually working to lift people out of their poverty as well as make their lives easier for them to sort of get by, and that's an important sort of ease of living, etc., etc. It's all happening.
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, this slide, this is a final slide in terms of the analysis. This presents what is happening to inequality at the sub-district level. Now, if you notice, these bands are narrower, and that's because the number of observations is so large. We have so many sub-districts that if you see the standard error or the band within which these averages lie, it's extremely narrow, which means we are saying this with extremely high degree of confidence. We are precisely measuring what the levels of growth, and what is you're seeing under NDA, the significant difference between NDA under Modi compared with UPA 2 and UPA 1, that the highest growth again have been in the least developed, less than 2%.
Yes.
So these are your
least
least
developed. We're talking about growth. Again, just to remind our viewers, we are talking about built up surfaces. So visible infrastructure that is coming up in these least developed districts of our country, and you can see where that number is. That's really high, isn't it, when you look at the average predicted growth rates, etc. And it's also important to demystify this by telling viewers that this cutoff is really 2020, isn't it? So you've had 4 years more of the Modi administration.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps
Yes.
going at this speed and this level of scrutiny and accountability, which means that when we have our next data set, those numbers could actually be showing up much bigger gaps.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we had the pandemic in 2020.
Yes, we did.
But we also know what has happened to pick up after that. We have had unusually high growth. And I think if we do this analysis in 2025, you're only going to see stronger results.
Stronger, even though there was a black swan event.
Yes, because the pickup after that has been phenomenal, right? Now, at this, the other thing to note here is, Rahul, at the sub-district level, which means highly granular and very precise estimates, look at the difference between NDA and the UPA, the two UPAs. And of course, we used to talk about high growth. Now, growth was indeed high, but it wasn't anywhere close to the kind of high growth sub-districts have had under the NDA regime. So, the difference between both the UPAs was not that much, right? But the NDA has clearly surpassed. So, the kind of convergence that now we are seeing in the country, where the remotest parts are now beginning to converge with our more developed parts, which is completely consistent with the monthly per capita consumption expenditure, which is showing that the rural-urban divide is now narrowing. And that is exactly what you see in this case as well. So,
and the one way of we'll just wrap up, but the one way of looking at all of this is to go back to the original 2 slides, the map, because the map actually gives you a very good idea of where all of this is now taken place in its entirety. So let's go to the map, which gives you the outcomes really in very, very stark terms. So here is the UPA map 2010 to 2015 and 2015 to 2020, and you can see these were, one hates to use the acronym, but the Bimaru states, some of them, which have now begun to sort of show a large number of red and orange and ochre, and that's 3% and above growth. And some of them have gone to 10%, even more, because the chart was showing us that. So for the first time, viewers, we get a sense really of activity through data that has taken place, distinguishing perhaps the Modi government from the UPA government, and therefore perhaps also explains the outcomes that we are seeing in election after election. And that fundamentally is what today the data proves. Thank you, Shamika Ravi, for giving us this very granular insight into how India is transforming.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.